A few days later, Takumi needed to cool down, so he chose refrigerators as his next project. Once he completed them, he explained to the girls that these fridges would help keep food cold, preventing it from spoiling. They were all thrilled as they felt the chilly air coming from the appliance. To make the refrigerators, Takumi combined iron, chromium, and nickel to produce stainless steel, then incorporated a magical device infused with cooling magic. Maria expressed her gratitude to Takumi, as she could now prepare meals using fresh ingredients whenever she wished. Takumi planned to give one of the fridges to Maria, while the other two would be sent to Papik for him to sell. With that task completed, Takumi was ready to move on to his next project. Sophia asked if he was planning to create something new again, but in reality, Takumi was considering upgrading their equipment instead. There were a few adjustments he had been wanting to make ever since their battle with the goblins, and with their upcoming journey, he wanted their gear to be in the best possible condition. With that in mind, he decided to craft a set using mithril and adamantite. Takumi went to the guild to ask Hans if there were any blacksmiths around who had experience working with mithril and adamantite. However, since these metals were extremely rare, there weren't many craftsmen with the necessary skills. If Hans had to make a guess, the only ones capable of handling them would be the dwarves from Nonstal. But since that was far away, traveling there wasn't an option for Takumi. Takumi resigned himself to the fact that he wouldn't be able to find a suitable blacksmith after all. However, just before he left, Hans mentioned a city called Horus, located northwest of the kingdom of Barkila. If Takumi traveled there, he should be able to find some mithril and adamantite. The only issue was that gaining access might be tricky, as only members of the blacksmith guild were permitted to enter the mines. Fortunately, Hans had a clever way to work around the rules. Hypothetically speaking, if Takumi were to accept a quest to eliminate the monsters that had appeared in the mine and, purely by chance, happened to stumble upon some mithril in the process, well, nothing would be preventing him from extracting the metals himself. At that moment, the guild master suddenly appeared and mentioned that he had the perfect quest for Takumi. He explained that the guild had been running low on treant wood recently, and with winter approaching, they needed someone to gather more. Since treants often roamed near the Hora's mines and Takumi was already looking for a reason to go there, the guild master figured he wouldn't mind doing a bit of wood collecting along the way. Moreover, since Takumi was already planning to head there, the guild master wanted him and his party to escort someone as well. However, this was beginning to feel like a lot of work. Since Takumi had never taken on an escort mission before, he asked why the members of Lion Fang couldn't handle it instead. The guild master explained that Lion Fang was currently out on a separate mission, so they couldn't do it. And Takumi was the only other person he could ask. Takumi eventually agreed to take on the escort mission, but he still didn't know much about the route to Hora's, so he asked Hans how long it would take to get there. Hans explained that the journey would take 7 days by horse-drawn carriage, but if Takumi used a monster horse instead, he could cut the travel time down to just 4 days since they were twice as fast as regular horses. Thinking it was a great idea, Takumi asked if he could take one. But unfortunately, Real arrived just in time to inform them that all the monster horses were already being used by Lion Fang. Hans was surprised to see Real return so soon, but Real explained that he and his party hadn't finished their quest, yet he had simply taken down a black buffalo along the way and came back to drop it off before it spoiled. Since he needed to head back out in the morning to rejoin the rest of Lion Fang, he planned to stay in town for the night. Seeing this, Takumi offered him a place to stay at his house and the chance to take a bath. Real was excited by the prospect of a bath, so he decided to take Takumi up on that offer. Takumi was glad to hear it, but he actually had somewhere to go after this, so he said Real could just wait for him at his house. But Real said he would rather accompany Takumi in that case. Takumi allowed Real to accompany him to Papek's company, and while he was there, he successfully persuaded Papek to lend him a couple of monster horses for his mission. However, in exchange, Papek requested that Takumi sell him some of the rare ores he managed to acquire from the Hora's mine. Also, about the refrigerator he had brought earlier, Papek really liked it, so he asked Takumi to make some more for him once he got back from his mining trip. Meanwhile, back at Takumi's mansion, Sophia is starting to get really worried that something might have happened to him since he hasn't returned yet. Later that evening, Takumi is walking back home with Real, and he apologizes for dragging Real on such a long errand, even though he must be tired from his journey. But Real doesn't mind since he is the one who said he'd accompany Takumi. At that moment, Real sensed a hostile gaze fixed on him and Takumi. It was clear right away that he wouldn't stand a chance against this person with his current equipment. So without hesitation, he grabbed Takumi's hand and took off running. However, their pursuer quickly closed the distance and landed a powerful kick across Real's face. The attacker then revealed herself to be Sophia, who was absolutely convinced that Real had been trying to kidnap Takumi, so without a second thought, she was ready to cut him down. Just before she could strike Real down, Takumi quickly stepped in front of him and told Sophia she had completely misunderstood the situation. After he explained everything, Sophia knelt down and sincerely apologized to Real for almost killing him over nothing. Fortunately, Real was unharmed and decided to forgive her, though he now had plenty of questions he wanted to ask Takumi. And that list only grew longer when they finally arrived at Takumi's house, where Real was met with the sight of even more cute girls. He asks Takumi what's going on, so Takumi explains that he needed a maid to take care of the house and someone to guard him, so he hired Sophia and Maria. And then there's Maple, who happened to evolve at one point. Real is excited to see Maple again in her new form, and Maple remembers him, but she still doesn't like Real, though Real dropped to his knees in despair, realizing that both Bogger and Heath were already married, and even Takumi had 2 girlfriends while he was still single. However, Takumi quickly corrected him, clarifying that he wasn't actually dating either Sophia or Maria. Seizing the opportunity, Real decided to take his chance and asked Sophia if she had ever considered going out with him, but she instantly rejected him, and Maria did the same. And just like that, Real found himself defeated once again. A little while later, as Real is crying in the bath, Takumi talks to Maria and Sophia about the mission he accepted so he can go mine some mithril and adamantite. Sophia thinks it's a good idea since Trent wood is a precious material, and everyone else is on board. So Takumi says they will head out in 3 days' time. The next morning, Real set off to rejoin the rest of Lion Fang. Once he was gone, Takumi decided it was time to start crafting new equipment for his party's upcoming treant hunt. He obtained a magic-draining tungsten carbide sword, which was already an impressive weapon, but it was far too large to use in its current form. Because of that, Takumi planned to break it down. He attempted to use his alchemy skill on it, but the sword put up resistance, requiring much more effort than usual. However, after some persistence, Takumi finally managed to break the metal down and forge it into 2 separate blades. The blades drain the mana of any opponent who is cut with it, so Takumi is happy with the results, although it left him totally drained. 3 days later, Takumi and his group met with Papek to pick up the carriage he had promised them, and inside, they found the man the guild master had assigned them to escort already waiting. Curious, Takumi approached him, and the man introduced himself as Gambo. With that, the group set off on their journey, but along the way, they made a stop in a nearby field so that Takumi and the others could hunt their treat. As they ventured into the forest, Sophia noticed a treant attempting to blend in with the surrounding trees and quickly pointed it out to Takumi. Without hesitation, he charged forward to take it down. The treant tried to strike back, but with Sophia and Maria covering him, Takumi easily managed to cut it down. However, that was just one treant. There was still an entire forest full of them left to deal with. It'll take too long to kill each treant individually, so Sophia suggests that they should use magic, and it seems to be working really well. However, they are soon confronted by an elder treant, and no matter how much magic they use to attack, it keeps regenerating. The only way to finish it off was to cut down its main body in a single strike, so Sophia instructed Takumi to coat his sword in fire and attack, while she and Maria provided cover. Working together, they finally managed to bring down the leader treant. With that, their treant hunting was complete, and they were free to continue their journey to Horaz. When they arrived in Horaz, the group made their way to the local Adventurers Guild. Once there, Gambo pointed out a quest that called for adventurers to exterminate the iron mole monsters in the mines. These creatures fed on ores, making them a significant threat. By accepting this mission, they would gain permission to enter the mines. A little while later, the group is mining in the mines, and they get really lucky because it doesn't take long for them to find some mithril and adamantite ore. However, the ores attract some monster moles from the ground, around, so they have to be ready to fight. Just before the mole emerged, Takumi took a moment to think and quickly came up with a clever idea. The moment the iron mole surfaced, he hit it with a burst of light magic, blinding it instantly. As a result, the creature collapsed, making it an easy target to finish off. While Takumi's method was undeniably effective, Sophia and Maria couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed since it meant they wouldn't get the chance to fight. Since the mining trip was successful, they all returned to Bolton a few days later. Once they do, Takumi visits Gambo's shop so he can learn how to work with mithril and adamantite. Gambo explains the process of extracting the metal from the ore, and after a lot of effort, Takumi is able to create some mithril and adamantite, so he starts using it to make all kinds of magic-imbued gear. Once Takumi finished crafting the new gear, he handed it over to Maria and Sophia for them to test out. The girls were amazed at how lightweight yet durable their armor had become, and to their surprise, it even had magic infused into it. Takumi explained that he had imbued their gear with magic that complemented their respective elemental affinities. As for his own armor, he had enchanted it with something called Thunderclap, an ability that provided an extreme agility boost, allowing him to move at incredible speeds. However, the second Takumi tries to do something cool by showing off how fast he is, he ends up crashing face first into a wall. Next, Takumi presented the new weapons he had crafted, along with the enchantments he had placed on them. Both Sophia and Maria were thrilled with their new spears, but Sophia had a special request. She was willing to lay down her life to protect Takumi, so she asked if he could forge a shield for her, allowing her to guard him more effectively. Takumi thinks that's a good idea, but he reminds Sophia that she should value her own life just as much as she values his. Nolan had been observing Takumi the entire time. Pleased with the progress he was making, she knew he would need every bit of strength he could muster for the battles that lay ahead. Meanwhile, 1 year in the future, in the kingdom where the other heroes had been summoned, Akira and Yamato stood ready. With their training now complete, they were about to embark on a mission assigned to them by the king of Samandor. Back in Takumi's time, he had just completed the shields that Sophia had requested. However, upon seeing how much effort and energy it took out of him, she couldn't help but feel guilty. She wished Takumi had an assistant who could help him with his production, making his workload a little easier. Meanwhile, in the royal capital, the Lord received a letter from Sidonia. It appeared that word had spread about Takumi's toilets and the purification magic infused in them. Although they had yet to learn who Takumi was, they were already making plans to take action against him. The Church of Divine Light, upon discovering the purification magic toilets being used in Barkula, decided to send a messenger to meet with the king. They quickly made an official appeal to the Pope in Sidonia. As a result, they convinced the Pope to declare that purification magic is a divine gift from their god, meaning they alone should have the right to use it. Consequently, they demand that the king of Barkula surrender the patent for the purification magic circle. On top of that, they insist that the king reveal the identity of the person responsible for creating these purification devices in the first place. The king hears out the church's demands, but since they are outright ridiculous, he decides to disregard them completely. The church's messenger is stunned that the king would have the audacity to defy the church and, in response, threatens to command all the priests stationed in Barkula to return to Sidonia immediately. However, the king remains unfazed by this threat and, in fact, goes so far as to encourage him to follow through with it. Takumi eventually learns about the king's decision and feels relieved that the king didn't betray him. However, he can't help but feel a bit uneasy about how strongly the king rejected the Church of Divine Light. With Sidonia's church likely to turn against Barkula, Takumi would hate to be the cause of such a major conflict, but Papik reassures him that there's no need to worry. After all, the Church of Divine Light isn't the only religious group in this world, there's also the Church of Creation. Even though the Church of Divine Light holds significant influence, there are still plenty of followers of the Church of Creation in this country, so their absence won't be a huge loss. On top of that, the priests of the Church of Creation offer recovery magic to anyone in need, whereas the Church of Divine Light demands exorbitant exorbitant fees for any holy magic. Since the Church of Divine Light is backed by Sidonia, Takumi will likely have to steer clear of them from now on. But that's just how things are. Anyway, the reason Papek came to see Takumi today is that he had previously shown the king Takumi's toilet and refrigerator, and the king was so impressed that he requested Papek to bring Takumi to meet him. Takumi feels a bit uneasy about meeting someone as important as the king, but Papek reassures him that it's not a command he's free to decline if he chooses. That said, Papek is really hoping he'll accept, as it would greatly benefit his company's relationship with the royal capital. Takumi ultimately agrees to the meeting. That evening, he shares the news with Sophia and Maria, asking if they would be willing to accompany him to the royal capital. Bacalados both eagerly express their desire to go with him, so he proposes that they set out in a week. However, there's plenty to prepare in the meantime. Since the journey to the royal capital will take around 7 days, Maria will need to prepare a substantial amount of food in advance. While Maria handles that, Takumi mentions that he'll be working on new cloaks for both her and Sophia. He recently received some dark element magic stones from Papek, and by using them to craft the cloaks, he can enchant them with a perception blocking spell. While such a spell would be incredibly useful in battle, Takumi's main reason for making it is to ensure that Sophia and Maria won't be bothered when they arrive in the royal capital. Later on, Sophia and Maria go out shopping, and while selecting some fruit, Maria grumbles that Takumi doesn't have enough confidence in himself. Sophia agrees, noting that he's good-looking, possesses remarkable alchemy skills, and has an incredible talent for invention. She continues enthusiastically listing all of Takumi's great qualities, but Maria can't help but notice just how excited Sophia gets when talking about him. This makes her suspect that Sophia might actually be in love with him. Sophia denies having such impure thoughts and says she only loves Takumi as her master. But Maria knows there's a love story in there somewhere. Meanwhile, back at the town's church, Takumi kneels before the statue of Nolan to offer a prayer. Before long, a radiant light envelops him, and he suddenly finds himself in Nolan's domain, where she greets him warmly. It's been some time since she last saw him, and she's already heard about his invitation to the royal capital. So, if he's here to pray for a safe journey, she playfully remarks that he really should have brought her an offering. Takumi explains that he's actually here because he has a few questions he wants to ask. The Church of Divine Light worships a goddess named Anat, so his first question is whether there really is another goddess besides Nolan. Without hesitation, Nolan firmly states that she is the only true goddess in this world. But if that's the case, then Takumi asks what Anat is meant to be. Nolan doesn't want to reveal too much, so she says Takumi will find out about that when the time comes. While he's here, Takumi also takes the opportunity to ask Nolan if she knows what happened to the other heroes who were summoned alongside him. It's been 10 months since he arrived in this world, and under normal circumstances, an event as significant as summoning heroes from another world would have caused a huge stir. Yet, oddly enough, Takumi hasn't heard anyone mention it. Nolan decides to be honest and admits that when she summoned Takumi, she tampered with time a bit, sending him 1 year into the past. In other words, the heroes technically haven't even been summoned yet. It will still be a few more months before that happens. However, Takumi is confused as to why she would go through all the trouble of sending him back in time, so he asks her to explain. Unfortunately, Nolan says his time's up, so she won't be answering any more questions for now, and she also asks him to bring her sweets as an offering next time he visits her. Takumi tries to tell her he has more questions to ask, but Nolan chops him on the head, knocking him back down to the mortal world. Takumi eventually wakes up on the church floor, feeling like Nolan had been dodging his questions about the other heroes. However, since he has no plans to get involved with them anyway, it doesn't really matter. He then heads back home to finish the new cloaks he had been working on for the girls. Once they're ready, he gives them to Maria and Sophia, who both absolutely love the designs. Hearing their praise makes Takumi happy, but there's still something else he wants to work on before their trip. He takes both of them to his workshop and reveals his next project, a carriage of his own. With all the traveling they've been doing lately, he figures it would be much more convenient to have a comfortable carriage they can use whenever they need, rather than constantly borrowing one. However, even if he builds the carriage himself, he still doesn't have a horse to pull it, so he's thinking of borrowing one from the guild. But Maria quickly tells him there's no need for that, they can simply get one themselves. The Forest of Death outside Bolton is teeming with monsters, and if they search long enough, they might be able to find a unicorn or a drake horse, both of which would be much faster than an ordinary monster horse. Maria seems especially excited about the idea of going out to catch one, but Takumi can't help but feel a bit uneasy. Eventually, they set off in search of a horse, and as they make their way into the forest, Takumi turns to Sophia and asks if drake horses are really that much faster than the monster horses they typically borrow from the guild. She confirms this and tells him that a drake horse possesses speed, stamina, and durability that far exceeds that of a regular monster horse. The drake horses look pretty much the same as regular horses, but they have a huge rhino-like horn and dragon scales along their body, so it should be pretty easy to spot if they come across one. Just then, Maple calls out to the three of them and says they should hurry up so they can find a horse already. Maple is clearly full of energy, but that's mainly because she's excited about getting a new companion once Takumi forms a familiar contract with a horse. However, before the others can catch up to her, Sophia suddenly senses a monster nearby and instinctively readies her sword. A moment later, a bush wolf leaps out of the bushes, but instead of attacking, it simply runs past them. Takumi confidently points out that the wolf didn't notice them thanks to their anti-perception cloaks. While Sophia is certainly impressed by how well the cloaks work, she suggests that it might be a good idea to take them off so they can actually engage in some monster fights. A few moments after taking the cloak off, Sophia manages to slay a boar in a single blow. Maria thinks this is great since she can prepare the boar meat for them to use on their trip. Maple is getting impatient and tells everyone to hurry up already, but then Takumi notices a dead tree on the ground, and he could really use the wood since he's making a carriage. So he and Sophia get ready to begin cutting it up. Now that Maria is preoccupied with the meat and Takumi is focused on the tree, Maple grows impatient waiting for them and decides to venture ahead on her own to find a horse. As she makes her way through the forest, she notices an unusual number of dead trees scattered around the area, making her wonder what could have caused such destruction. Continuing deeper into the forest, she eventually stumbles upon a drake horse lying on the ground, and from the looks of it, it's in pretty bad shape. Maple cautiously approaches the drake horse and asks if it's injured. In response, the drake horse immediately fires a lightning strike at her, forcing her to back away. However, she quickly realizes that it's just acting out of fear due to its wounds. She understands that feeling all too well, as it's exactly how she felt before Takumi found her. Wanting to reassure the creature, she gently tells it that there's no need to worry, her master is a really kind person, and once he arrives, he'll heal its wounds. All they have to do is wait a little longer. But it doesn't look like they'll be able to wait in peace because two termite monsters suddenly show up, and they don't look friendly. Maple realizes that the termites are the ones who hurt the drake horse, so she uses her webs to capture them and throws their bodies in front of the horse to be electrocuted. But there are a lot more termites, so they might be in trouble here. To shield both herself and the drake horse, Maple quickly spins a barrier out of her silk. While it manages to buy her some time, she knows the termites will eventually break through. Desperate, she tries calling for Takumi, attempting to establish a connection with him, but there's no response. Growing anxious, she starts to worry that he might have gotten so caught up in his excitement over the wood, he found that he completely forgot about her. Hopelessness sets in as the termites finally tear through her barrier, so Maple closes her eyes and awaits death. However, when she opens her eyes again, she finds Takumi standing over her, and she's so glad that she's all right. Maple jumps into his arms out of relief. He actually came to save her because she was so worried when he didn't respond to her call. Takumi explains that the likely reason her call didn't go through was the barrier she created. While it was well constructed for blocking attacks, the tightly woven layers also ended up blocking all mana signals, preventing her message from reaching him. However, the moment he realized he had lost Maple's signal, he immediately rushed to her last known location. Once he arrives, he quickly spots the drake horse behind Maple, and she wastes no time asking him to save it, so he extends his hand and tries to use healing magic on it. However, the drake repels him since it doesn't trust Takumi. Sophia tells Takumi that they need to leave soon since there may be more termites in the area, but if they leave the drake out here on its own, it is bound to die. So Takumi decides to put it in his pocket dimension with Maple until they get home. Sophia cautions Takumi that he can't place such a high-level beast into his pocket dimension without forming a contract first, as doing so would put immense strain on his body. However, Takumi is confident that he'll be fine. As it turns out, he was not fine the moment he placed the Drake horse into his pocket dimension. He collapsed almost instantly. Even after the girls brought him back home, he has remained unconscious for the past 12 hours. The fact that the Drake is still in his pocket dimension means Takumi's mana will continue to be sapped until he eventually withers away. And he can't open the barrier to let the Drake out because he's unconscious, so Sophia gets in touch with Maple and asks her to open the pocket dimension from inside. Maple agrees to help but points out that the Drake will likely be scared if it suddenly finds itself in an unfamiliar place. To keep it calm, she decides to set up a tent in the front yard where it can adjust to its new surroundings. Once the Drake is released from the pocket dimension, Takumi should start to recover. In the meantime, Maria heads out to buy medical supplies to treat him and asks Sophia to stay by his side so that he has someone with him when he wakes up. Later that day, Takumi finally wakes up from his coma and heads outside to see the Drake. Maple has been telling the Drake all about Takumi while they waited for him to recover, and after introducing himself, Takumi asks if it would be willing to form a contract with him. The Drake trusts Maple, and since she is vouching for Takumi, it agrees to form a contract with him. Now that the Drake has been tamed, Takumi can finally use magic on it without worrying about any backlash. Without hesitation, he casts High Heal to mend all of its wounds. In an instant, the Drake regains its strength, standing on its own once more, fully restored. Now that the Drake is officially one of Takumi's familiars, he needs to give her a name. Since he named Maple after a leaf, he decides to stick with the theme and names the Drake Camellia, after the tree that keeps its leaves all year round. Maple is happy that Camellia has fully recovered, and with everything finally settled, Maria calls everyone inside for dinner. She's prepared a feast, and since Takumi hasn't eaten in an entire day due to being unconscious, he definitely needs a good meal.